She had no right to be in my apartment, no reason to comfort me, yet her silent presence saved me from drowning in grief. The clock on the wall showed 9:30 p.m., but time had lost all meaning for him. 3 months had passed since his world changed forever. 3 months since his father left this world, taking with him all the warmth and guidance that had shaped his entire life. His name was Alex, and at 34 years old, he had always been the strong one in his family, the one everyone called when they needed help, the one who fixed problems and made everything better. But now, sitting alone in his small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building, he felt completely lost. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. The only sound came from his computer, which hummed softly on his wooden desk near the window. He had been trying to work on a design project for the past 2 hours, but the screen just stared back at him with its bright white glow. His fingers rested on the keyboard, but no creative ideas came to his mind. Outside his window, the city was still alive. Cars moved slowly down the street, their headlights cutting through the darkness. People walked on the sidewalks below, probably heading home to their families, to warm dinners and comfortable conversations. But Alex felt disconnected from all of it, like he was watching life happen from behind a thick glass wall. His sister Lisa had been calling him every day. She worried about him constantly, and he could hear the concern in her voice whenever they talked. But Alex had become very good at pretending everything was okay. He would tell her he was eating well, sleeping enough, and keeping busy with work. All lies, but necessary ones. He didn't want to burden anyone else with his sadness. The truth was much different. Most days he barely ate anything more than a piece of toast or a cup of instant coffee. Sleep came only in short bursts, filled with dreams of his father. Sometimes good dreams where they talked and laughed like old times. Sometimes sad dreams where his father was trying to tell him something important, but Alex could never quite hear the words. Work had become impossible. As a graphic designer, creativity was everything to him. But grief had stolen all his inspiration. Colors looked dull, shapes seemed meaningless, and every project felt like climbing a mountain with no strength left in his legs. His clients were understanding, but he knew he couldn't keep making excuses forever. The apartment felt smaller every day. These same 4 walls had witnessed his breakdown 3 months ago, when Lisa called with the news. They had seen him cry until no more tears would come. They had watched him pace back and forth for hours, trying to make sense of a world that suddenly felt upside down. His father had been his best friend, the man who taught him how to ride a bike, how to be kind to others, and how to find beauty in simple things. They used to talk on the phone every Sunday morning, sharing stories about their week and planning their next fishing trip together. Now Sundays felt like the longest day of the week. Alex pushed his chair back from the desk and stood up slowly. His whole body felt heavy, like he was carrying invisible weights on his shoulders. He walked to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, staring at the same half-empty containers of food that had been there for days. Nothing looked appealing. Nothing looked like it was worth the effort. He closed the refrigerator and moved to his bedroom instead. The bed was unmade, sheets twisted, from another restless night. Clothes lay scattered on the floor where he had dropped them. Before his father passed away, Alex had always kept his space neat and organized. Now, cleaning felt pointless. What was the use of making everything perfect when nothing felt right anymore? Sitting on the edge of his bed, Alex picked up a framed photo from his nightstand. It showed him and his father from last summer, both of them smiling big smiles while holding up the fish they had caught during their weekend trip to the lake. His father's eyes were bright with joy and pride. Alex remembered that day perfectly. The sun had been warm, the water calm, and they had talked for hours about everything and nothing. Looking at the photo now, Alex felt that familiar tightness in his chest. The feeling that started in his heart and spread outward until his whole body felt like it might collapse. Grief was like that. It came in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes crushing, but always unexpected. He set the photo down and lay back, on his bed, still fully dressed in the same clothes he had worn for 2 days. The ceiling above him had a small crack running from one corner toward the center. He had noticed it months ago and planned to fix it, But like so many other things, in his life lately it remained undone. Outside, snow had started to fall. He could see the white flakes drifting past his bedroom window, collecting on the fire escape beyond the glass. Winter had always been his favorite season when his father was alive. They would build snowmen together when Alex was young. And later, they would sit by the fireplace talking about life while drinking hot chocolate. Now winter just felt cold and empty. The snow reminded him of all the conversations they would never have, all the places they would never visit together, all the advice he would never receive when life got difficult. Alex closed his eyes and tried to remember his father's voice, the way he used to say his name with such love and pride, the way he laughed when Alex told him funny stories from work, the way he said "I love you, son" at the end of every phone call. But memories, Alex had learned, were both a blessing and a curse. They brought comfort in small doses, but too much remembering made the reality of loss even more painful. His father's voice was already starting to fade from his memory, and that scared him more than anything else. The apartment felt enormous and tiny at the same time. Enormous in its loneliness, tiny in its ability to contain all the sadness that filled every corner. Alex had never understood how silence could be so loud until now. The quiet pressed against his ears like a physical force, making him aware of his own breathing, his own heartbeat, his own existence in a world that suddenly felt strange and unfamiliar. As he lay there staring at the ceiling crack, Alex had no idea that his life was about to change in the most unexpected way. The sound came so quietly that Alex almost missed it. A soft click like someone turning a key very carefully. He lay perfectly still on his bed, listening in the darkness. At first he thought maybe he had imagined it. Grief sometimes played tricks on his mind, making him hear things that weren't really there. But then came the footsteps. Light, careful footsteps moving through his living room. Alex's heart started beating faster. He knew that sound wasn't in his imagination. Someone was actually inside his apartment. His first thought was that it must be Lisa. His sister had a spare key and she often stopped by to check on him. She probably saw his lights were still on and decided to come up and make sure he was okay. Lisa was always worrying about him these days, and he couldn't really blame her. He knew he hadn't been taking very good care of himself lately. Alex prepared himself to put on his usual act. He would sit up, smile, and tell Lisa that everything was fine. He would ask about her family and make some excuse about why he looked so tired. It was a routine he had perfected over the past 3 months, and Lisa always seemed to believe it, or at least pretended to. But something felt different about these footsteps. They were too careful, too quiet. When Lisa came over, she usually called out his name as soon as she walked in. She would turn on lights and move around with the confident steps of someone who belonged there. These footsteps were different. They moved slowly, pausing occasionally like someone who was trying very hard not to make any noise. Alex strained his ears, trying to figure out what was happening in his living room. He could hear soft sounds, maybe someone carefully moving around his coffee table, or stepping over the pile of books he had left on the floor earlier. The sounds were so gentle that they almost seemed respectful, like whoever was out there didn't want to disturb anything. A strange feeling came over Alex. Instead of fear, he felt curious. If someone wanted to rob his apartment, they would probably move faster and make more noise. If it was Lisa, she would have announced herself by now. So who could it be? And why were they being so incredibly quiet? The footsteps stopped right outside his bedroom door. Alex held his breath. His bedroom door was slightly open, just a few inches the way he always left it. He could see a thin line of light from the hallway streaming across his floor. In that pale light, he saw a shadow. Someone was standing just outside his room. For what felt like forever, nothing happened. The shadow remained perfectly still, and Alex couldn't even hear breathing. It was as if time had stopped completely. Alex found himself staring at that shadow, trying to understand what was happening. His mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was a neighbor who had gotten confused about which apartment was theirs. Maybe someone was lost and had accidentally used the wrong key. Then very slowly the bedroom door began to open wider. The hinges made the smallest squeak, a sound Alex had heard thousands of times but never paid attention to before. Tonight, that tiny squeak seemed as loud as a car horn in the absolute silence of his apartment. A figure stepped into his bedroom. In the dim light coming from his window, Alex could see it was a person, but he couldn't make out any details. The figure was shorter than he expected, and moved with a kind of gentle grace that reminded him of water flowing over stones. Alex wanted to speak, to ask who was there and what they wanted, but something kept him quiet. Maybe it was shock, or maybe it was something deeper, a feeling that speaking might break whatever strange magic was happening in his room. The figure didn't seem dangerous. There was something peaceful about the way they moved, something that made Alex feel calm instead of afraid. The person in his room seemed to know exactly where they were going. They didn't stumble or bump into anything, even though the room was quite dark. They moved around his scattered clothes and stepped carefully over a book he had dropped beside his bed earlier. It was like they could see perfectly in the darkness, or maybe they knew his room better than he realized. Alex's eyes began to adjust to the low light. He could see that the figure was wearing dark clothing, maybe a sweater or cardigan. They seemed older based on the way they moved. Not old in a frail way, but old in a wise, experienced way. Their steps were deliberate and sure, like someone who had walked many miles in their lifetime and learned to move with purpose. The figure approached his bed slowly. Alex felt his breathing become shallow. He didn't know whether to pretend to be asleep or to sit up and confront this mysterious visitor. Part of him was scared, but a bigger part was fascinated. Who was this person and how had they gotten into his apartment? More importantly, why did their presence feel somehow comforting instead of threatening? As the figure came closer, Alex caught a faint scent in the air. It was something familiar, something that reminded him of his grandmother's house when he was little. A gentle, warm smell that made him think of safety and kindness. The scent was mixed with something else, maybe tea or herbs or flowers. It was the kind of smell that made you want to take a deep breath and feel peaceful. The mysterious visitor reached the side of his bed and stopped. Alex could see them more clearly now, though their face was still hidden in shadow. They stood there for a moment, seeming to look down at him with what felt like kindness. Alex had the strangest feeling that this person understood exactly what he was going through, like they could see right into his heart and feel all the sadness he had been carrying around for 3 months. Without saying a word, the figure began to sit down on the edge of his bed. The bed barely moved as the person sat down. They were light, careful not to disturb Alex too much. The mattress dipped only slightly under their weight, and Alex could feel the warmth of another human being sitting just a few feet away from him. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in months, the simple comfort of not being completely alone. Now that the mysterious visitor was closer, Alex could see more details in the soft light filtering through his bedroom window. The person was an elderly woman, probably in her 70s. She had silver hair that caught the moonlight, pulled back in a neat style that looked both practical and elegant. Her clothing was simple but well cared for, a dark cardigan over what looked like a comfortable dress. But it was her face that caught Alex's attention most. Even in the dim light, he could see that she had kind eyes. Not just polite or friendly, but truly kind. The type of eyes that belonged to someone who had seen a lot of life and had learned to be gentle with the world. There were lines around her eyes, the kind that come from years of smiling and laughing, but also deeper lines that suggested she had known her share of sadness too. The woman turned slightly toward Alex, and that's when she smiled. It wasn't a big smile, nothing dramatic or overwhelming. It was quiet and warm, like sunshine breaking through clouds on a winter morning. In that simple expression, Alex felt something he hadn't felt since his father died. He felt understood. The smile seemed to say many things without using any words at all. It said, "I see you." It said, "I understand your pain." It said, "You are not as alone as you think you are." Most importantly, it said, "Everything is going to be okay, even if it doesn't feel that way right now." Alex stared back at her, trying to figure out who this woman could be. She looked familiar, but in the way that strangers sometimes look familiar, when you're tired or emotional. Had he seen her in the building, in the neighborhood, at the grocery store? His mind searched through recent memories, but everything felt fuzzy and unclear. The woman reached into a pocket of her cardigan and pulled something out. In the soft light, Alex could see it was a small photograph, the kind with white borders that people used to get developed at photoshops. The picture looked old and well-handled, like something precious that had been carried around for many years. She held the photograph gently in both hands, looking down at it with an expression of deep love and deep sadness mixed together. Alex couldn't see what the photo showed from his position on the bed, but he could see how much it meant to her. The way she held it reminded him of how he held the picture of his father, like it was the most valuable thing in the world. After looking at the photograph for a long moment, the woman carefully placed it on Alex's nightstand, right next to his own picture of his father and himself at the lake. The two photos sat side by side in the darkness, like old friends keeping each other company. That simple gesture spoke louder than 1,000 words. Alex understood immediately what she was telling him. She had lost someone too. She knew exactly what it felt like to have a hole in your heart where someone you loved used to be. She understood the weight of grief, the way it could make everything feel impossible and meaningless. Tears began to flow down Alex's face, but for the first time in 3 months, they didn't feel like tears of pure sadness. They felt like tears of relief. Relief that someone else understood. Relief that he wasn't crazy for feeling so lost and broken. Relief that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely alone in this terrible journey through grief. The woman noticed his tears and gently reached over to pat his hand. Her touch was warm and soft, like his grandmother's hands had been when he was small and scared. There was something magical about that simple touch. It seemed to pull some of the sadness right out of his body and replace it with comfort. Alex looked up at her face again and saw that her eyes were also wet with tears. But her expression wasn't sad. It was compassionate and strong. It was the expression of someone who had walked through the valley of grief and come out the other side, not unchanged, but not destroyed either. It was the face of someone who had learned that it was possible to survive the worst thing that could happen to you. They sat together in the quiet darkness, this strange woman and Alex sharing a moment of perfect understanding. No words were needed because they both spoke the same language, the language of loss and love, and the weird way those two things got all mixed up together when someone important died. Alex felt his breathing slow down for the first time in months. The tightness in his chest began to loosen slightly. The crushing weight that had been pressing on him since his father died seemed to lift just a little bit. It was still there, but it no longer felt impossible to bear. The woman continued to sit with him, occasionally patting his hand in a gentle, motherly way. Sometimes she would look at the photographs on his nightstand, and sometimes she would look out the window at the falling snow. But mostly she just sat there, being present, being real, being a reminder that Alex was not the only person in the world who had ever felt this kind of pain. Time seemed to move differently while she was there. Minutes felt like hours, but also hours felt like minutes. Alex had no idea how long they sat together in that peaceful silence. All he knew was that for the first time since his father died, he felt like he could breathe properly. He felt like maybe tomorrow wouldn't be quite as hard as today had been. The woman's presence was like medicine for his wounded soul. Not the kind that makes everything better immediately, but the kind that helps you heal slowly and properly, from the inside out. As the minutes passed, Alex found himself studying the woman's face more carefully. In the soft glow from the streetlights outside, he could see the gentle lines that mapped out a lifetime of experiences. Her eyes held a depth that only comes from living through many seasons of joy and sorrow. There was something timeless about her, as if she carried the wisdom of generations in her quiet presence. The woman seemed completely comfortable sitting there in the silence. She didn't fidget or look around nervously like most people would in such an unusual situation. Instead, she sat with the kind of peaceful stillness that Alex had only seen in very young children or very wise adults. Her hands rested calmly in her lap, and her breathing was slow and steady. Alex wanted to ask her so many questions. Who was she? How did she get into his apartment? Why had she come to see him? But every time he opened his mouth to speak, something stopped him. The silence between them wasn't empty or awkward. It was full of understanding and comfort. Breaking it with questions felt wrong, like interrupting a prayer or disturbing a sleeping baby. The photograph she had placed on his nightstand caught his attention again. From where he lay, he could now see it more clearly. It was a wedding picture, probably taken many decades ago. The photo showed a much younger version of the woman sitting beside him, wearing a beautiful white dress and smiling with pure happiness. Next to her stood a handsome man in what looked like a military uniform, his arm around her waist and his face bright with love and pride. Looking at that old photograph, Alex felt a strange connection to this mysterious woman. Both of them had pictures of people they loved and missed. Both of them carried memories that were precious and painful at the same time. Both of them knew what it felt like to look at a photograph and remember how life used to be before everything changed. The woman noticed him looking at the picture and picked it up again. She held it close to her heart for a moment, then looked at it with eyes that sparkled with both love and tears. Alex could see that this wasn't just any old photograph. It was a treasure, a connection to someone who had meant everything to her. She turned the picture slightly so Alex could see it better, and he realized that the man in the uniform looked like someone who had been full of life and laughter. Even in the faded colors of the old photograph, Alex could see the joy in both their faces. They looked like people who had been deeply, completely happy on that day long ago. The woman's fingers traced the edge of the photograph gently, the way Alex sometimes touched the frame of his father's picture when he missed him most. It was a gesture of love that crossed all boundaries of time and language. In that simple touch, Alex saw his own grief reflected back to him, but somehow it didn't feel as heavy when it was shared. She looked up from the photograph and met Alex's eyes directly. In that moment, he felt like she could see right into his soul. Her gaze wasn't intrusive or uncomfortable. It was warm and accepting, like being wrapped in a soft blanket on a cold night. She seemed to understand not just that he was sad, but exactly what kind of sadness he was carrying. Without saying a word, she communicated something that Alex desperately needed to hear. Her expression seemed to say that grief was not something to be ashamed of or hurried through. It was part of love, part of being human, part of having a heart big enough to miss someone terribly when they were gone. The woman reached over and gently touched Alex's hand again. This time her touch lingered a little longer. Her fingers were soft and warm, and Alex could feel the slight roughness that comes from years of hard work and taking care of others. These were hands that had probably comforted many people, cooked countless meals, wiped away tears, and held on to precious things. As she held his hand, Alex felt something shift inside him. The anger he had been carrying, anger at the world for taking his father, anger at himself for not being strong enough, anger at everyone who still had their parents, began to soften. It didn't disappear completely, but it transformed into something easier to bear. The woman's presence was like a gentle rain after a long drought. Alex hadn't realized how much he needed human connection until she appeared in his room. For months, he had been isolating himself, pushing away anyone who tried to help. But this woman hadn't asked permission to help him. She had simply shown up and sat with him in his darkness. Looking at her calm face, Alex began to understand something important. Healing didn't have to be loud or dramatic. It didn't require therapy sessions or support groups or people telling him to move on or stay strong. Sometimes healing was as simple as someone sitting beside you and showing you that you weren't alone in your pain. The snow outside continued to fall, creating a peaceful backdrop for their silent conversation. Each snowflake caught the light from the street lamps before disappearing into the darkness. Alex watched the snow and felt like each flake represented a memory of his father. Beautiful, delicate, and brief, but part of something larger and more permanent. The woman followed his gaze to the window and smiled again. This time her smile seemed to include the snow, the night, the whole world outside his small apartment. It was a smile that suggested she found beauty even in sad moments, hope even in difficult times. Alex felt his eyelids growing heavy for the first time in months. Not the exhausted, restless heaviness he had been feeling lately, but a peaceful tiredness that promised real sleep. The woman's presence had created a bubble of safety around him, a place where he could finally let his guard down and rest. As drowsiness began to take hold, Alex realized that this strange, wonderful night was slowly coming to an end. But he also knew that something fundamental had changed inside him. He was still sad, still grieving, still missing his father terribly. But he no longer felt completely alone in the world. The clock on Alex's nightstand quietly ticked past midnight, and still the woman sat with him. Her presence had filled the room with a kind of peace that Alex hadn't experienced since before his father died. The silence between them had become comfortable, like an old friendship that didn't need words to express deep understanding. Alex found himself thinking about all the people who had tried to help him over the past 3 months. His sister Lisa called every day with worried questions. His co-workers sent careful emails asking if he needed anything. His neighbors nodded sympathetically when they passed him in the hallway, but none of them had been able to reach the deep, aching loneliness that lived inside his chest. This mysterious woman had done something different. She hadn't tried to fix him or cheer him up or give him advice about moving forward. She had simply shown him that someone else understood exactly what he was going through. Her old wedding photograph sitting next to his picture of his father seemed to create a bridge between their different kinds of loss. As the night grew deeper, Alex noticed that his breathing had become natural and easy for the first time in months. The tight knot of anxiety that usually lived in his stomach had loosened. His shoulders, which had been tense and hunched for so long that he had forgotten what relaxed felt like, had finally dropped into a comfortable position. The woman seemed to sense the change in him. She looked at him with approval, like a grandmother, watching a grandchild finally fall asleep after a difficult day. Her eyes held a quiet satisfaction, as if she had accomplished exactly what she had come there to do. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, and the first hint of dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. The street lights were still on, but they seemed softer now, competing with the gentle gray light that meant morning was coming. Alex could hear the distant sound of early commuters starting their cars, the normal sounds of a world waking up to a new day. The woman noticed the changing light and slowly stood up from the edge of the bed. She moved with the same careful grace she had shown all night, making sure not to disturb Alex too much. She walked to the nightstand and picked up her old wedding photograph, holding it close to her heart one more time. But before putting the picture away, she did something unexpected. She leaned down close to Alex and whispered the first words she had spoken all night. Her voice was soft and warm, with a slight accent that suggested she had come from somewhere far away long ago. "Grief shared is grief halved, dear one," she said gently. "Your father's love lives in you, and it always will. That love doesn't disappear when someone dies. It just changes form. Now it becomes part of who you are, part of how you treat other people, part of how you see the world." Her words fell on Alex's heart like cool water on a burn. He felt tears coming again. But these were different from the angry, desperate tears he had been crying for months. These were tears of relief and understanding. Someone had finally explained to him what he hadn't been able to figure out on his own. "The sadness you feel," she continued, "is just love with nowhere to go. But it doesn't have to stay trapped inside you. You can let it flow out into the world by being kind to others, by helping people who are hurting, by living the kind of life that would make your father proud." Alex nodded, not trusting his voice to speak. The woman smiled and gently patted his hand one last time. Then she tucked her photograph back into her cardigan pocket and began to move toward the bedroom door. She paused at the doorway and turned, back to look at him. In the growing morning light, Alex could see her face more clearly than he had all night. She had kind wrinkles around her eyes, the sort that come from years of smiling and caring about other people. Her silver hair caught the light in a way that made her look almost like an angel. "Sleep now," she said softly. "Real sleep. When you wake up, the world will still be here, and you'll be strong enough to be part of it again." With that, she stepped quietly out of his bedroom and began making her way through his apartment with the same careful steps she had used when she arrived. Alex listened to her footsteps grow fainter as she moved toward his front door. He heard the soft click of the door closing behind her, and then silence returned to his apartment. But this silence was completely different from the heavy, oppressive quiet that had been suffocating him for months. This silence felt peaceful and full of possibility. For the first time since his father died, Alex felt like tomorrow might actually be okay. As the morning light grew stronger, Alex finally allowed his eyes to close. Within minutes, he was sleeping more deeply than he had in months. No nightmares came to disturb his rest. No anxious thoughts woke him up every few hours. He simply slept, and in his dreams he heard his father's voice telling him that everything was going to be all right. When Alex woke up many hours later, sunlight was streaming through his bedroom window. He sat up slowly, expecting to feel the same crushing sadness that had greeted him every morning for 3 months. But instead, he felt something he had almost forgotten existed: hope. The night felt almost like a dream, but Alex knew it had been real. The indentation on his bed where the woman had sat was still there. The scent of jasmine tea still lingered faintly in the air. And most importantly, something inside his heart had shifted during those quiet hours of shared understanding. Alex got out of bed and walked to his window. Outside, the world looked clean and bright under its blanket of fresh snow. People were walking on the sidewalks below, going about their morning routines. Cars drove carefully down the snowy streets. Life was continuing just as it always did. For the first time in 3 months, Alex felt ready to be part of that life again. He was still sad, and he knew he would always miss his father. But now he also knew that grief didn't have to be a prison. It could be a bridge to understanding other people's pain and a source of compassion for anyone who was suffering. That morning, Alex finally understood what the mysterious woman had been trying to tell him. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms into something that can heal not just your own heart, but the hearts of others who need comfort and understanding. The woman had given him the greatest gift of all. She had shown him that he was not alone, and that his father's love would live on through every act of kindness Alex would show to the world.